PowerPlayChess, brought to you in association with Kagi. Here's my recap of Game 6 of the World Chess Championship between Liren and Gukesh Dommaraju. So going into this game, scores level. Ding with white played the London system. Well, this is interesting because in Game 6 in his 2023 match against Nepo, he also played the London system and scored the most fantastic win. So, could be auspicious. Let's see what happens. D5. Gukesh, of course, would have expected this and played his moves quite quickly. And Bishop D6. Now, I think Bishop D6 is a very good continuation for black. It's a very good way of challenging white's system. Basically, black is going to play with Queen C7 and put pressure on, well, for example, if the knight comes to E5. There are good ways for black to play this position, and I don't think black has any difficulties here. This is the sort of standard way for white to play, or you play Bishop G3 as well. But Ding didn't go for those, and I, as I say, I think black shouldn't have any difficulties against those main moves. Ding went for a sideline. He played Bishop B5 check. Again, played it quickly, and the knight blocks the check. And then he took on C6 and exchanged bishops and played the queen to A4. So this is a very different way of handling the London system than perhaps many of you will be familiar with other ways of playing it, playing on the king side. But this is a very positional way for white to play. So basically, well, let's see, after this move, Ding played Queen A3. So looking to gain control over these dark squares. You can see there's a pin here. Incidentally, Ding had exactly this position previously, but he'd had black against Carlsen, and Carlsen simply castled here, but Ding after C5 didn't have any problems. But Queen A3, looking to conquer the dark squares. Knight E4 protects that pawn. And then Knight D2. So simply looking to exchange off this knight and again take here. So yeah, if an exchange of knights, then black has problems with the C5 pawn. So that's why E5 was played, looking to break out and basically stirring up trouble while white's king is still in the center. Exchange of knights. And queen takes C5. So Ding has won a pawn. But Gukesh wasn't fazed by this. He was still moving very quickly. Both players were moving quickly, actually. Queen G6. So putting pressure on the pawn on G2. So if castles, then Bishop H3. Whoops, castles, then Bishop H3. Wins material. Or G3, then again that bishop comes into play, slicing across the board, and that looks really dangerous. Wonderful compensation for black with that bishop. Would sink itself on the D3 square. So, well, Ding wasn't fazed. He played Knight D2 very quickly. Obviously he's in his preparation. And queen takes G2. And then castles queenside. Again, played very quickly by Ding. Queen takes F2. We've had 15 moves, and the players playing this really quickly. Quite a choice here of pawns to take. Ding went with D takes E5. He could go Queen E5, but that's probably just about equal. This has actually been seen before. A game between Aronian and Dominguez went Rook DE1. that ended in a very quick draw by repetition. So d takes e5. I was going to say it's a new move. In fact, there's an email correspondence game that went d takes e5. Rook b8. I mean, this is very complicated now because of the damaged pawn structure on both sides. So using semi-open file, so there's pressure there. So obviously knight takes e4, not possible because of queen takes pawn, checkmate. Knight c4, Ding playing really quickly. And yeah, I mentioned this correspondence game that actually went queen f3 in this position, and this ended in a draw very quickly. The position will just repeat. But queen f3 looks a slightly weird move, looks like a computer move, when in fact black can play a normal developing move here. And indeed, after almost quarter of an hour's thought, Gukesh played bishop e6. It looks to me very natural to bring this bishop into the game to threaten bishop takes knight and queen takes pawn, mate. Yeah, why not connects the rooks as well? So Ding defended against that threat with rook d2. Again, he was playing very quickly. Queen comes back, hitting the rook, which moved across to defend the e-pawn. So Ding obviously in his preparation, but Gukesh a little bit unfamiliar with the position. I think Gukesh, he thought for almost 20 minutes here. His next move, I think very understandable. He exchanged off bishop for knight because that knight wants to just land on that d6 square. I mean, that controls so many important squares in black's camp. So I think looks absolutely right to exchange off bishop for knight. Also, in major piece endgames, then, you know, even if one side wins a pawn, then the drawing tendency is greater. So I think definitely the correct way, the safe way for black to play. And then Gukesh brought his queen back to f5, defending that pawn on e4 and hitting the pawn on e5. And here was where Ding thought for the first time for a long time. So they've played 20 moves. And Ding now thought for 42 minutes. Wow, that's a big time investment. So he's obviously reached the position that he was comfortable with in his preparation. He knows it's okay for white, maybe slightly better. But here is where you're actually playing the position. You're not just relying on your memory. So that's why he invested so much time. And he went for queen takes pawn. Queen takes d5. And then queen d5. So I think a very reasonable way for white to play the position, because in the endgame, well, I know the drawing tendency is high in rook and pawn endgames. However, it's clear that white has the better chances here because, white can be ready to advance the pawns on the queen side, and it's not so easy for black to advance his king side pawn majority here, because white's rook is very active on the 5th rank. I think it's easier for white to push here. So that's why Gukesh decided to avoid the queen exchange. Ding pushed for a queen exchange again with queen d6 and queen g5. Queen d5, Ding offering the exchange again, queen e7. Queen d6, so Well, it looks like we're heading for a draw here. So basically with queen d5, Ding offers a threefold repetition. If Gukesh now played the queen back to e7, then that is a threefold repetition. They've repeated the position for the third time. Gukesh could claim a draw here. But this is really interesting. He decided to play on with queen h4. Now that is a brave decision. After the game, Gukesh said, I like playing chess. I didn't, why not play on? I didn't see too much danger. And it's true that, this queen is nice and active. There are pawns to hit. Gukesh also talked about the fact that, there are open lines towards White's king. So it's not easy for White to push the pawn majority on the queen side. Nevertheless, Ding has control over this open file. And the computers believe that White is actually slightly better here. But it's not an easy position. g6, okay, solving the back rank problem. And then queen e5. Covering a pawn here, perhaps letting that rook come into play. Rook e8 hits the queen, which came back to g3. Well, again, the rook on pawn endgame, definitely more comfortable for White. So Gukesh avoided that with queen h5. Queen f4, creeping forward. Queen a5, hitting the pawn on the queen side, a3. Clock times, 32 minutes remaining for Ding to get to the time control at move 40, so no big time pressure. Gukesh had 27 minutes and put in a big think at this moment. He decided to play his queen to b5 after quite some cogitation actually. So he's keeping this active queen, maybe looking to come in here and perhaps move the rook over. Rook d4, and that's nice because that can shut off any attack on the b file. And of course hits the pawn on e4. I mean, the play is really subtle at this point. Queen e2, that queen, I mean, this is the hardest working queen in professional chess at the moment. I mean, it's been just taking a big tour around the board, just trying to be irritating. Rook d2, hitting that queen, which came to f3. Now, here is another critical moment in the game. Again, an exchange is offered. Previously, we had Ding wanting to go into the rook and pawn endgame. And here Gukesh offers an exchange. Okay, here's the moment when you should have a think, I should have a drink. What should White play in this position? I mean, this is really quite a critical juncture in the game, actually. Okay, what would you play with White in this position? Cheers. Well, Ding just played king c2. And that just creeps up the board. It might be that the king can support the pawns when they advance. But it might have been better to play queen g5. In this case, Ding wants to keep the queens on the board. The queen is really active here. And it's such a tricky position, I mean, for both sides, because both sides ultimately want to advance their pawn majorities, but they both have to take enormous care of the king. But I think it's because of these active rooks, I think it's easier for White to play this position. So I think queen g5 is a good move here, probably better than the game continuation. One thing you don't want to do is exchange queens here. First of all, there's pressure here, and after e4, g5 starts the process of connecting those pawns. That's better for black. But king c2 played, and Gukesh now snapped off the queens and played f5. So nice pawn chain. Pawn on e4 is supported. Still a really tricky position, actually. I mean, one inaccuracy can just spin one side into a lost position, actually. All three results are possible, as they say. So one interesting idea is, okay, I mean, an obvious move is to start pushing those pawns, but then g5. And, you know, these pawns start to look more dangerous than white's. If that's taken, then, I mean, with those pawns supported by the rooks, it looks incredibly dangerous. So that's why h4 was played by Ding, just preventing g5. And again, another really critical moment where Gukesh decided to play it safe and push this pawn and tied white's rook down to defense. He could have tried king g7 with the idea of advancing his king up the board, perhaps attacking this one, perhaps moving in to attack the pawn on f4. It's really dangerous. He was worried about rook d7 check. And if king h6, then, yeah, I mean, the problem is that this king could get into difficulties with the rook coming across, and there's potential for some kind of checkmate here. It's really tricky, and Gukesh running a little bit short of time. I mean, he had something like 5 minutes left, but, you know, in these tricky positions, that's perhaps not enough. And he decided to avoid this. I mean, white is still okay there. But, yeah, would have been perhaps a little bit more testing. But Gukesh decided to play e3, tying this rook down to e2. And this is, I mean, it's a very sensible move. It's a sensible way to play, actually. Rook e7, so covering the 7th rank, and perhaps just preparing to advance the king. So again, we have a moment where Ding could start advancing the queenside pawn majority, but watch what happens. King f7, c5, okay, rook here, b4, and then it'll be black's turn to get the pawns going. So, for example, after an exchange here, king g6, and king takes pawn, followed by f4. It's really tricky. So that's why Ding decided to bring the king over, attacking this pawn, and then played h5. So one of the reasons for playing this is to just preempt this idea of king g7 to h6 to h5. So if king g7, then you can just exchange. I mean, that's probably still a very reasonable way for black to play, actually. But anyway, Gukesh decided to take on h5. I mean, shatters the pawns, but he wants to use that h-pawn. Rook takes pawn, so it's all about specifics now. Rook d7 check. So that checks the king away. And then king g7. So if the pawns are advanced, then this king comes up the board, stopping rook h5, and then this one can advance, distract the rook, and then the pawn goes through. So that's Gukesh's idea. So that's why Ding played rook g2 check, and that forces the king back, because if king h6, that would be most unfortunate. There's a snap checkmate. So after rook g2 check, the king went back to h8. Now the pawn threatens to advance, so the rook has to come back. And the king comes to g7. And yes, the position repeats. So at this moment, on move 46 after king g7, that's a threefold repetition. Again, the players simply agree to draw here before calling over the arbiter. So a draw. Really tense game in all its phases. So we had the first bit of serious preparation here from Ding. And yeah, we got to a position at, well, roughly move 17. Yeah, probably 20 moves, perhaps even deeper than that. Ding had prepared this game, where he got a slight advantage, but Gukesh was up for the challenge. And this was a very interesting moment when Gukesh, I think psychologically a very bold move. That's a kind of power move, declining the repetition at this moment. Very interesting. But the game never really tipped over to one side or the other, and was really in a dynamic balance for actually really the whole of the 46 moves, and finally draw in the end. I think was a very, very fair result, but good fighting chess from both players. So after 6 games, score is 3-all. Monday is a rest day. I'll see you for game 7 on Tuesday.